Deputy Captain Connolly, 12 minutes.
With their acute awareness of the crisis in housing, health, public transport, water, the voters in the very recent election elected us not to limit the debate as to how we can reduce taxes. Rather, we were asked to change the debate and, among other matters, to look at what level of tax is required so as to enable this country to provide the essential services which are a prerequisite for a cohesive and civilised society, one that allows all of us with a measure of dignity to participate. Yet, notwithstanding that very clear message from the electorate, this government, along with its Fianna Fáil colleagues, has failed once again to hear the message and for months has centred the debate and argument on how much of the available £1.2 billion fiscal space should be spent on reducing taxation or how much should be spent on services. And one side or other is congratulating themselves on winning in relation to that mix. With the resulting budget today, tinkering with various reductions and increases and missing the fundamental point that each and every budget, including this one, must not be seen as an end in itself, but as an essential ingredient of an overall plan and vision, one based on the value of human dignity, equality, human rights, solidarity, sustainability and the pursuit of the common good. And let me say at this point that those words are not mine. They come straight from the policy document of Social Justice Ireland and not from any left radical group. And I think it's a vision that no Democrat in this House could have a problem with. And yet this budget once again utterly fails to hear that message and utterly fails to recognise the interdependence between a vibrant economy and the relationship between that and social cohesion, good governance and sustainability that must characterise any society if it is to thrive in the long term. And we have today the speech from Minister Noonan talking about the economy is in good shape. And yet what he is talking about is giving free rein to the market. Both ministers talked about learning from the mistakes, and neither of them have learned. And they are now giving full rein to the market again. And in addition, the Minister Noonan saw fit to set a new domestic target of a debt to GDP of 45%, a figure pulled out of the sky, it would seem, with no justification whatsoever and no explanation as to why that's necessary. And in addition, he talked about a rainy day fund. Again, no explanation as to why that might be necessary, or indeed no consideration of the alternative that the best rainy day fund is to have an educated population working to their maximum ability, regardless of whether they have a disability or not. That is our best rainy day fund. And you have learned absolutely nothing if you haven't learned that the market will not provide. It hasn't provided and it won't provide. We have the most serious housing crisis, which we know the national figures for, but I'm going to take the opportunity to give the local figures. There are approximately 15,000 people on the waiting list in Galway City, and they're being housed and on that waiting list from 2002. And I think we're in the process of building 14 houses this year, notwithstand the show that went around the country by Mr Coveney, rebuilding the new Ireland. 14 houses this year, and if we're lucky, that will be 14 out of 69. The rest might start this year. And this programme today gives full rein to the landlord class. And if David is listening, I'm sure he's turning in his grave at the amount of money that's now been given over to the landlord class in this country to provide a home for our people with absolutely no security of tenure. And we look at the health service, and I welcome the addition, and I'll come back to some of the positive things in this. As I speak, there were 44 people on trolleys in a centre of excellence yesterday. And I have made the point repeatedly since I came into this stall that we could have story after story every day. 44 people on trolleys in a centre of excellence. Cancer clinics cancelled, waiting lists of 2 and 3 years, people staying in B&B, delayed discharges and delayed admissions. And you ask, why is that? And the Minister says, we'll just give a little more money and that will sort it out. No money will sort out this, because there have been years of depletion, deliberate depletion, while public money went into the private sector, a refusal to employ nurses or doctors in the numbers that were required. and an absolutely failure to have any vision or plan as to what is necessary to enable us to have a public health service that's available for everybody. In relation to mental health, practically every single TD in this stall has stood up and talked about their experience of mental health, families they know, the rate of suicide, and yet this budget mentions nothing about an implementation monitoring body for the Vision for Change, which was there before and set for three-year periods, because the government at the time had the vision to see that we needed an implementation body because documents pile up on desks unless we have them. No implementation body, nothing here about that. In relation to climate change, one of the most serious issues facing us, I would say the most serious issue facing us, we have an allocation of 50 million, which I welcome. However, it will go nowhere near meeting our targets. Members of the Government's Climate Change Advisory Council have highlighted the failure if we fail to meet Ireland's EU targets in 2020 and 2030. We will have huge fines to pay. There is no mention of any of that today in this budget. In relation to education, I welcome the increase. I welcome the proposed increase in the number of teachers, but again there is no mention, as has been mentioned by my colleagues, of a reduction in class size, in capitation grants, and most importantly for me, in literacy figures. 1 in 6 in this country are at the basic literacy level. That's over 500,000 Irish adults who find reading and understanding everyday text difficult. It's actually worse in relation to maths. 1 in 4, 754,000 people have difficulties in reading basic world maths. No mention in this budget of any of those facts. No mention of domestic violence, other than a bland statement that we will roll out or enhance our services. Let me just dwell on domestic violence for a moment or two, now that the other minister is in the room. The cost of domestic violence at a minimum to the economy is 2.2 billion of a loss. That's a loss to the economy for failure to deal with domestic violence. Over 12,500 people, that's 9,448 women with 3,068 children, received support and our accommodation from a domestic violence service last year. There were almost 50,000 helpline support and information calls, and so on. 1 in 3 Irish women reported some type of psychological violence by a partner, and so on. All of the figures are here. I'm running out of time. I won't go into them. But the point I wish to make is failure to deal with domestic violence, failure to roll out the Vision for Change actually costs the economy a lot more. And I actually despair of this government understanding that and beginning to deal with it. I welcome the change and the additions in relation to the pension, the €5 increase. I welcome that in relation to the social welfare, although it doesn't apply to anybody under 26. I welcome the proposals in relation to childcare. But what I don't welcome is that this is done like a jigsaw, without the overall picture, without the overall vision. And so we'll go from this budget to the budget next year without having a vision and a plan and a timescale that sets out to have houses for us all within a reasonable period of time, and that nobody should be on a social housing waiting list for longer than a year, and that each and every one of us, regardless of our salary, should have access to public health, and that each and every one of us should be able to say we are doing our bit for climate change. And we have a public transport reference here in the budget simply in relation to Dublin. The rest of the country doesn't exist from the government's point of view in relation to the provision of public transport. I live in a city where there is a proposal, notwithstanding our commitments under climate change, to build a 16.5-kilometre road at a basic cost, and it will rise, of 500 million. That's 30 million for each kilometre of that road. At the moment, we have 96,000 vehicles at peak hour on a daily basis in Galway City, and absolutely no vision in any of the documents before me or any of the speeches made that would help us to deal with that problem in a sustainable manner, given our commitments under climate change. In relation to housing, and I've mentioned the crisis that exists, and we're simply going backwards in not alone in being reliant on the market, but in providing huge subsidies and tax breaks to the landlord. I welcome the commitment to deal with Section 110 and vulture funds. I sit on a Public Accounts Committee, and I watched with dismay, or I read with dismay, NAMA. I'm not going to go down that route because I sit on the Public Accounts Committee, but to make a point in relation to NAMA and the selling off of property to vulture funds who make a huge profit and then pay little or no tax. And all of this change and the few change that have been forced in this budget has been forced not by yourselves, not by Fianna Fáil, but by the people on the ground who voted in a difference and a different Dáil, and forced us to speak out and hold you to account. Agus concretnú chuireann sé díma orm go bhfuil laidú suntasach an buiséad don Gaeltacht agus don Gaelga. Beidir go bhfuil míhuiscint áit éigean ach laidú ní faoin géad tá sé docreite gan míniú ar bith. Bhí éileamh bunúsach ag conradh na Gaelga maidir le 8 milliún déag sin an méid, agus bhí sé rinsean acu leis an méid airgid sin 1000 post breise a chur ar fáil sa Gaeltacht, agus níl pin breise anseo. Ba cód go méid nára ar an rialtas, gur 1000 maithagad a ceann cóla.
Thank you, Deputy.